Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe it wasn't deliberate. Maybe the Marines were just too focused, too proud, too certain that no civilian could understand what they were dealing with. But Tessa Rowan didn't need their attention. She had learned long ago that silence was its own weapon, quieter, slower, but far more exact. The day had begun with the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick before noon. A white, dry sun stretched across the flats, bleaching everything: tents, rifles, the flags that sagged against their poles. The range smelled of gun oil and baked dust. People leaned against bleachers made of dull metal, squinting toward the targets 1,000 yards away. Each distant clang of steel echoed like a heartbeat across the open ground. It was supposed to be a friendly event, a charity match for the base rehab center. Marines lined up to compete, civilians gathered to watch, kids waved miniature flags, and a few veterans sat quietly near the back, their expressions calm and knowing. Yet beneath the surface there was tension, that thin wire that hums between pride and performance. Tessa wasn't there to compete. She wasn't even supposed to be noticed. She wore a faded hardware store t-shirt and an old Navy cap, her braid tucked low and tight against her neck. From a distance, she could have been anyone: a volunteer passing out water, a bystander offering paper cups from a cooler. But anyone watching closely would have seen it: the stillness. The kind that doesn't come from shyness but from control. She moved quietly under the vendor tent, refilling the tray, her fingers marked by faint scars, small burns, thin white lines that time hadn't bothered to erase. There was one in particular, just along her right knuckle, pale and precise, like the memory of a lesson learned the hard way. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but a shooter would. Across the range, the first Marine fired. The rifle cracked sharp against the wind, a sound that cut through laughter and chatter. The crowd leaned forward. The spotter called out, "Soft hit just outside the ring." A murmur rippled through the bleachers. Some chuckled, but it wasn't cruel. It was nervous, the kind of laughter that comes when people don't know whether to be impressed or disappointed. The next Marine stepped up, confident, loud, maybe too eager. His first two shots were good. The third sailed wide. By the fifth shooter, a pattern had started to form. Every string began strong, then slipped. The targets drifted off-center, the wind played tricks, and the heat shimmered like a mirage. The captain barked orders, frustrated but professional. His arms folded tight across his chest, his jaw flexing. Tessa watched from the shade, eyes hidden beneath her cap. She saw the way the bipods dug into the dirt too deep. The torque was wrong, locked stiff instead of breathing with recoil. Every missed shot wasn't just wind. It was setup, pressure, over-control. She could read it in the rhythm of their loading hands, the impatience creeping into their shoulders. But she said nothing, not yet. Someone beside her sighed. "Hot one today." "Yeah," she murmured, though her attention was still on the line. The wind shifted again, curling from the west. The flags fluttered weakly. A young Marine, maybe 22, face red under the sun, stepped to the bench. His movements were crisp but uncertain. He inhaled, held, fired. The shot went high, then another wide left. The spotter's tone softened. "Off steel." The Marine exhaled hard, muttered something under his breath. The captain turned away, disgust sharp in his posture. Tessa's hand tightened around the tray. She wanted to say something, just one sentence, but she could already hear the reply: "Ma'am, we've got this." She stayed quiet. By noon, the laughter had faded. The crowd wasn't amused anymore. They were watching with a different kind of focus, the quiet tension that fills a space when pride is unraveling in real time. The captain barked again, "Next." No one moved. The heat shimmered over the targets. Dust hung suspended in the air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a paper cup rolled off the table and skittered against the gravel, breaking the silence like a dare. Tessa exhaled, steady. Her voice, when it came, was low but clear. "Sir," she said, not shouting, just enough to carry, "can I borrow your rifle?" The sound of it, calm, direct, sliced through the murmurs like a whistle. Heads turned. The captain blinked, half laughing. "Excuse me." "Your rifle," she repeated, setting down the empty tray. "You're fighting your mounts, I can show you." For a second the world held its breath. The spotter squinted, unsure if he'd heard her right. Someone in the stands whispered, "Did she just?" The captain's mouth curved into a smirk. "Ma'am, this isn't a demo booth." Tessa didn't flinch. "No, sir, but you're missing because your mounts are too tight. They're choking your recoil. I can fix it." The chuckles came again, louder now. The Marines exchanged glances. A few phones lifted, not out of mockery this time, but curiosity. People loved an underdog moment, even when they thought it would fail. The captain tilted his head, mock gracious. "You think you can outshoot Marines, miss?" "Rowan," she said simply. "And no, sir, I just think I can show you why they're missing." The pause that followed was electric. The captain laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Fine, be my guest." He gestured toward the bench like a ringmaster opening the stage. The crowd murmured, restless. Even the wind seemed to hush, waiting. Tessa stepped out from under the tent. The sunlight struck her face, bringing out the fine lines near her eyes, the kind carved by years of concentration, not age. Her boots pressed into the gravel with a steady rhythm. She walked like someone approaching a friend she hadn't seen in a while. The captain folded his arms. "Range is hot," he said. The range officer hesitated, unsure, then nodded. "Range is hot." Tessa crouched beside the rifle. Her hands moved without hesitation, loosening, adjusting, aligning. She didn't measure. She didn't second-guess. The sound of metal shifting under her fingertips was precise, clean. The spotter leaned closer to his scope, muttering, "She's done this before." A Marine nearby frowned. "Who is she?" No one answered. She adjusted the bipod, then checked the level. Every motion small, deliberate. Her thumb brushed the bolt, muscle memory, not showmanship. The faint scar along her knuckle caught the light for half a second. The captain's smirk began to falter. Tessa didn't notice. She was already lowering herself behind the rifle, body fitting into the dirt like a puzzle piece. She breathed once, twice. Then the world began to shrink to the smell of oil and dust, to the mirage trembling over the sand, to the silent language between wind and steel. She didn't shoot yet. The crowd grew quieter. Someone coughed. A child whispered. Then one clean sound. Clank. The plate jumped dead center. The echo carried across the range, low and perfect. The spotter flinched, eyes wide. "Hit," he said automatically, like the word had surprised him. Tessa reset her finger on the trigger. Second breath, second shot. Clank. The same perfect tone. No one laughed this time. By the fifth shot, even the flags had gone still. The crowd leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. The captain stood motionless, sunglasses slipping down his nose. Each clang of steel landed like punctuation, rewriting the tone of the day. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't performing. She was working slow, precise, patient. "Who is she?" someone whispered again. A Marine in the bleachers frowned. "That form, that's textbook. I've seen that stance in training videos." The spotter said nothing. He was too busy watching through the glass, too busy realizing that every adjustment she made, every breath she took was deliberate, learned, earned. Her left elbow slid a fraction deeper into the dirt, her shoulder aligned. Clank. 7. Clank. 8. By 10, the captain's arms had dropped. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was watching, not with arrogance now, but awe. Tessa's eyes stayed on the scope, unmoving. Her breath matched the wind. Each pause between shots stretched longer, softer. This wasn't defiance. It was a kind of reverence, a woman speaking a language the rifle remembered. And still she kept shooting. Clank. 12. The sound of the steel seemed to fill the sky. Even the reporters who had come for cheerful quotes stopped writing. Their pens hung midair, forgotten. By the 15th shot, the spotter's voice had changed, no longer uncertain but reverent. "Good hit. Center ring." The captain exhaled, shaking his head slowly. He whispered, "What the hell?" Tessa heard nothing. Her world had narrowed to flags and wind and dust. She adjusted a single click, then another half, trusting instinct over instruments. Clank. 18. In the stands, a veteran stood and removed his cap, not in applause, in respect. By 20, the laughter was gone. The crowd had fallen silent, wrapped in something heavier than noise. Awe had replaced curiosity. She wasn't proving anything. She was reminding them. That discipline never rusts. That silence can still command a field. When the captain finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. Her rifle did. Clank. The sound rang across the flats like a truth, finding its echo. What do you do when the silence starts teaching you something? The air over the range had changed. It wasn't just heat anymore. It was awareness, the kind that prickled against the back of the neck when something sacred began unfolding, and everyone instinctively knew not to interrupt. The wind shifted again, subtle but real. A faint ripple passed through the flags, then stilled. Tessa adjusted half a click, nothing more. Her eyes stayed downrange, calm, reading the shimmer. Clank. 21. The sound rolled back like thunder, pretending to be gentle. The spotter no longer called out in surprise. He whispered now, reverent, as if each word might disturb her rhythm. Good hit." The captain leaned forward, elbows on knees, forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to be in charge of this range. He had seen good shooters before, but not like this. There was no tension, no bravado, no posturing, just control, patience. Another shot. Clank. 22. Someone in the stands finally found the courage to speak. "Is she one of ours?" A Marine sergeant shook his head slowly. "Don't think so. She's too old school. Look at her follow-through. That's AMU technique, the way they used to teach before everything went digital." The words began to spread, whispered from row to row. AMU, Army Marksmanship Unit, Bennying, Old Guard. It all sounded like rumor, but the kind that felt truer than silence. Tessa didn't hear any of it. Her breath was measured, soft, deliberate. Her shoulder rolled minutely between shots, distributing recoil like an artist working clay. The steel downrange rang again, pure and even. Clank. 25. The spotter glanced at the captain. "Sir, she's adjusting before the mirage stabilizes." The captain frowned. "She's guessing." The spotter shook his head. "No, sir, she's anticipating." The captain looked back at her. The hardware store volunteer, with dust on her boots and oil on her thumbnail, was out shooting his best-trained marksman under the worst possible conditions. And she was doing it like she was fixing a broken rhythm, not showing off. Another shot, another perfect hit. And in that moment he realized this wasn't luck, this was knowledge. The kind that doesn't fade when you stop wearing a uniform. The kind you carry in your bones. By 30, the crowd had stopped breathing in between shots. They leaned forward unconsciously, holding their breath each time the trigger broke. A boy near the barrier gripped his father's sleeve, eyes wide. "Dad, she hasn't missed once." His father nodded slowly. "That's because she's not fighting it." Fighting what? The wind. Tessa exhaled again, the faintest fog of breath visible in the heat. She let her finger rest, not forcing the trigger, just allowing it to break when it was ready. The rifle kicked softly. Clank. 31. The spotter swallowed hard. "She's using the far flag," he whispered. "Not the nearest one. Nobody does that anymore." The captain didn't answer. He was watching her eyes now, the focus there, unwavering, detached from everything except the dance of mirage and distance. Clank. 32. Each hit was identical. Not because she was robotic, but because she was. She adjusted every time, small invisible changes, reading the wind's mood like a conversation partner. Her hair stuck to the side of her neck. Sweat gathered at her temple, but she never blinked at it. Clank. 33. Even the children had stopped whispering now. The air over the range was thick with something no one could name. Awe wasn't the right word. Respect came closer. Reverence fit best. By 35, the captain stood, slowly, as if standing in the presence of something he hadn't expected to witness. He stepped closer to the firing line, eyes locked on her hands. They were steady, unhurried, firm, without strain. His chest tightened. Those were the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning not to flinch. The spotter murmured under his breath, "She's reading the wind like it's text." What? Like she's reading it, word for word. The captain didn't respond, because he understood now. Every Marine on that field did. She wasn't showing off. She was reminding them what mastery looked like before pride got in the way. Clank. 40. The range officer, who had been quietly tallying each shot, stopped writing. He simply watched, mouth slightly open. His hand hovered above the clipboard, pen forgotten. Range hot, someone whispered again, almost like a prayer. Clank. 41. And somewhere behind her, near the vendor tent, Mr. Dale, the old Air Force mechanic who ran the hardware store, arrived. He hadn't planned on coming, but the local radio had mentioned a civilian volunteer giving the Marines a run for their money, and curiosity got the better of him. He stood at the edge of the tent, hat in hand, blinking through the sunlight. It took him less than a minute to recognize the stance. That posture, that rhythm. He whispered under his breath, "You kept it, didn't you?" Tessa's next shot answered him. Clank. 42. The dust rose and fell again. The crowd swayed with the rhythm of her breathing. By the 50th shot, the heat had started to soften into late afternoon gold. Shadows stretched longer, cooler. The air shimmered slower now, lazy, as if even the desert had grown tired of testing her. The range was silent, except for one sound, steel. The captain lowered his voice. "She's been flawless for nearly 50. Who shoots like that?" The spotter didn't look away from his scope. Someone who stopped needing to prove it. Clank. 51. And then halfway through the sequence, something subtle changed. Not the wind, not the rhythm, the energy. It was the realization. A man 3 rose up from the front, gray hair. Veteran's cap spoke softly, as if remembering a line from an old story. "Rowan," he said. That name on a board at Bennying. Civilian instructor, taught wind calibration after the guard mishap. The whisper ran through the crowd like a spark through dry grass. "Rowan. Tessa Rowan." The captain's head turned slightly. His expression shifted from disbelief to recognition. Bennying. The older man nodded. She was the one who ran the Mirage Study Clinic, the one they said could read a gust before the flag even moved. The captain's throat went dry. He looked back at her, the quiet volunteer behind the hardware counter. And suddenly, it all made sense. The scar, the stance, the silence. Tessa wasn't just some civilian with good aim. She was the ghost of their own training manuals. The name on footnotes Marines had skimmed without realizing belonged to someone still alive, still watching, still capable of reminding them what those lessons really meant. Clank. 53. The sound carried like punctuation to revelation. The lieutenant colonel, who had been sitting silently 3 rows back, stood slowly. His expression didn't change much, but the respect in his eyes deepened. He spoke quietly, mostly to himself. "Rowan, I knew I'd seen that scar before." The captain turned toward him. "Sir, you know her." The colonel's gaze stayed on Tessa. "Taught a wind clinic 3 summers ago. Half my shooters rewrote their cheat sheets after she was done. She called Mirage the desert's handwriting." said if you can't read it, you're just guessing. He smiled faintly. Guess she wasn't guessing today. Clank. 55. The crowd's stillness deepened. The phones that had been raised high began to lower. Watching through a screen felt wrong now, like trying to record a prayer. Mr. Dale wiped a hand across his face, muttering, "Should have known." The spotter's voice cracked softly. "She's reading wind, not data." The captain exhaled, "Reading wind." "Yes, sir. The computers tell us what's probable. She's seeing what's actual." "Like intuition." "No," the spotter said, eyes never leaving the scope. "Like memory." Clank. 58. The lieutenant colonel finally stepped down from the bleachers. He didn't cross the line, didn't speak loud. Just stood at the rope's edge, hat tucked under his arm, and watched the woman who had once trained the very people watching her now. Clank. 60. The air seemed to shimmer differently now, not heat, but respect made visible. Someone whispered, "She's rewriting the story of this range." The colonel shook his head. "No, she's reminding it." Tessa's breathing never faltered. Her rhythm stayed unbroken, her focus absolute. The rifle and she were one. The world had narrowed to a single line, her pulse, the wind, and the target that had never been her enemy. It was something else. A conversation. A reconciliation. The ghosts of her past, forgiven one shot at a time. Clank. 65. Her shoulders rolled again. She wasn't tired. She was lighter now, each impact washing something old away, something she hadn't spoken about in years. She remembered the day she walked off the range after that training accident, the one that had ended someone's career and ended her own without words. She had promised herself never to hold a rifle again. And yet here she was. Not because of pride, not because of ego, but because silence had asked her to speak again, not with words but with precision. Clank. 70. The sound rang clear, beautiful, complete. And in that moment, she allowed herself one small thought, not of glory but of peace. The captain whispered, "Sir, how long can she keep this up?" The colonel's voice was quiet, "Until the wind stops teaching." How long can silence hold a crowd before it breaks into reverence? By the 71st shot, the range had forgotten it was a competition. The Marines no longer waited for turns. The civilians had stopped fanning themselves with pamphlets. Every eye was fixed on the woman in the dust, the one they now knew by name, though she hadn't spoken it aloud. Tessa Rowan. The name had moved like wind through ranks and rows, gathering weight with every repetition. What began as curiosity had become certainty, and what followed was respect, heavy, earned quiet. The captain no longer stood tall. His arms hung loose, sunglasses forgotten in his hand. Every clang of steel felt like a lesson delivered personally. He wasn't embarrassed anymore. He was grateful. Clank. 72. The sound rang longer than it should have, or maybe time itself had slowed to keep pace with her rhythm. The lieutenant colonel remained near the rope line, cap tucked beneath his arm, gaze steady. He'd seen extraordinary shooters before, men and women who could do the impossible when adrenaline and instinct aligned. But what she was doing wasn't adrenaline. It was grace practiced into precision. The spotter leaned closer to his scope, jaw slack but smiling faintly. "She's not even checking the scope reticle anymore," he murmured. The captain blinked. "What do you mean?" "She's predicting drift before it happens. The rifle's just confirming what she already knows." Tessa's breathing stayed slow, deliberate. Her shoulder eased back, caught the recoil, released it cleanly. Her trigger finger reset with the patience of a prayer. Clank. 73. Somewhere near the stands, a child whispered, "She hasn't missed once." A man beside him nodded. "That's because she doesn't think of missing as an option." Clank. 74. The dust shimmered across the flats, mirage bending like water, But she didn't fight it. She let it speak first, then answered. Her lips moved once barely. A silent count, a rhythm older than fear. She wasn't racing the wind. She was listening to it. A woman near the bleachers folded her hands in her lap as if in church. The sound of each impact struck something beyond admiration, something closer to faith. Because what they were seeing wasn't a performance. It was the quiet resurrection of purpose. Clank. 75. The range officer swallowed, voice barely audible. I've never seen a run like this. The colonel nodded. Neither have I, but look at her hands. They're not tense. That's not competition, that's craft. Tessa shifted slightly, letting her left elbow rest deeper into the sand. Her right hand flexed once, the faint scar along her knuckle catching the sunlight. It gleamed like a memory of pain long endured and finally understood. Clank. 76. Her mind wasn't on the crowd, not even on the Marines. It was on the years she'd spent hiding from this part of herself, stacking boxes, tightening screws, counting bolts instead of breaths. She told herself she was done with rifles, but deep down, she knew she had only been waiting for silence to find her again. And when it did, it came disguised as wind over the desert. Clank. 77. The spotter exhaled shakily. She's correcting for mirage drift mid-cycle. The captain frowned. You mean she's reading the heat? She's reading everything, the spotter whispered. Flags shimmer, dust, even the delay between sound and echo. He paused. I can't even do that with instruments. The captain didn't answer. He didn't need to. The lesson was already burning itself into him. Mastery doesn't announce itself, it just acts until everyone else goes quiet. Clank. 78. The sound rolled like a hymn across the flats. The air smelled of powder and heat and something human, humility. A private near the back of the line muttered softly, "That's what right looks like." And just like that, the phrase stuck. It moved through the Marines like a current, whispered once, then twice, then repeated like an acknowledgement. That's what right looks like. Clank. 79. The colonel's jaw tightened. He'd been in enough battles to know courage when he saw it, but what Tessa was showing them went beyond courage. It was devotion to craft, to truth, to precision. He looked at the captain beside him. You know what I see, son? The younger man shook his head slowly. I see patience as a weapon. Clank. 80. The echo hung there for a long moment, and somewhere, far behind the bleachers, the desert wind sighed as if it, too, understood the message. A camera clicked once, then stopped. No one wanted to ruin the sound. Mr. Dale stood under the tent, hands in his pockets, eyes bright. He whispered under his breath, she's not shooting to win, she's shooting to remember. Clank. 81. He wasn't wrong. Each shot was a conversation with her past, the version of herself that once walked off a range in silence, burdened by guilt that hadn't belonged entirely to her. She had carried it like a shadow, quiet and constant, until the day life offered her one more chance to speak in the only language she truly trusted: accuracy. Clank. 82. The Marines behind the rope began standing one by one, not to interrupt, not to challenge, but to witness. Even the captain, once so sure of his authority, now stood with his hands clasped behind his back like a student before a teacher. The colonel remained motionless, eyes fixed. She's at 83, the range officer whispered. Clank. 83. The spotter had stopped calling the count aloud. He didn't need to. The rhythm told its own story, slow, steady, unwavering. Each pause between shots grew longer, more deliberate, not hesitation, reflection. Because she wasn't just aiming anymore. She was remembering the lives she'd trained, the soldiers she'd guided, the lessons she'd left behind in manuals and margins. She was remembering that she had mattered once and still did. Clank. 84. The sound of it was a kind of forgiveness. The colonel leaned toward the captain. When you see something like that, you don't salute the person, you salute the principle. The captain nodded slowly, eyes never leaving Tessa. Yes, sir. Clank. 85. A girl near the front row lowered her phone, eyes glistening. She whispered to her mother, "She doesn't look proud." Her mother smiled faintly. That's because pride isn't what she's carrying. What is it then? Peace. Clank. 86. By now the light had softened. Shadows stretched long and golden across the range. The air felt cooler. The tension that had once filled the crowd had melted into calm. Even the wind seemed content to let her work. Clank. 87. And as she loaded another round, the smallest smile touched her lips, not for the audience, not for the Marines, but for herself. It was the smile of someone who had finally come home to the sound of her own steadiness. The colonel saw it and exhaled through his nose. "She's teaching them something they'll never find in manuals," he said softly. "What's that?" asked the captain. "That perfection doesn't shout." Clank. 88. The echo rolled away, leaving a stillness that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, like a silence that had earned its peace. The range officer wiped his brow and laughed under his breath, a short, reverent sound. "She's rewriting the record without even knowing there is one." Clank. 89. Behind her, the bleachers were no longer just a crowd. They were witnesses. Every person there, Marine, veteran, child, civilian, would carry this memory like a medal they hadn't earned but had been honored to observe. Clank. 90. The captain glanced at the colonel. "Sir, should we?" The colonel raised a hand. "Don't. You don't interrupt a prayer halfway through." Tessa blinked once, clearing the sting of sweat from her eyes. Her vision stayed sharp, her focus absolute. The rifle and she breathed together now. The mirage bent left, then straightened. The far flag bowed once polite. She took the next breath, the next break, and the next truth. Clank. 91. She paused after that one, the first true pause of the afternoon. She lifted her cheek from the stock, rolled her shoulder, and looked not at the target but at the space between. The place where sound and silence met. It was there she found what she'd come for. Not applause, not validation. Closure. She lowered her face back into the scope. The captain watched, eyes soft. "How does she keep doing it?" he whispered. The colonel's reply was barely audible. "Because for her the target isn't downrange, it's inside." Clank. 92. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The air itself carried the weight of respect. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, bathing the range in amber light, a truth settled over them all, one they would remember long after the sound of the final shot had faded. That skill without arrogance is a kind of grace. That silence, when filled with purpose, becomes its own anthem. And that sometimes, the most extraordinary act a person can perform is to do their work quietly and let the world come to stillness around it. Clank. 93. The echo sang across the flats, slow and low, as the day began to close its golden eye. How does a crowd know when they're watching history? Sometimes it's not announced. It simply unfolds, one breath, one sound, one truth at a time, until even the air forgets how to move. By the 94th shot, the sun had begun its slow descent, bleeding copper light across the flats. Shadows stretched long and sharp. The world looked carved from bronze, the sky, the dust, the steel. Every surface reflected something ancient. Tessa's face was calm beneath the brim of her cap. A single line of sweat traced her jaw, but she didn't wipe it away. Her eyes were fixed, reading distance the way a composer reads silence before the first note. Clank. 94. The plate sang and swayed. and the echo rolled back like a wave returning home. No one spoke anymore. The murmurs had died miles ago. The only voices left were wind, steel, and heartbeat. Mr. Dale stood near the tent, his cap twisted in his hands. His eyes glistened with pride that felt too big for words. He whispered to the man beside him, "That's the sound of someone remembering who they are." The man nodded. He didn't know her, but somehow he understood. Clank. 95. The lieutenant colonel stood perfectly still at the rope line. His posture wasn't rigid anymore. It was respectful. Every few breaths he glanced at the Marines beside him, young faces, humbled eyes, and knew they were seeing a masterclass no field manual could reproduce. "She's teaching without talking," he said quietly. The captain answered with a small nod, "And we're finally listening." Tessa adjusted half a click left, waded through a small gust, and fired again. Clank. 96. The wind tried to trick her once more, swirling unpredictable across the flats. She smiled faintly, a private smile like greeting an old rival. She gave it a quarter breath of patience and answered with steel. Clank. 97. The spotter had stopped recording numbers. His pencil lay forgotten beside his boot. All he could do was watch and learn. Each time she pressed the trigger, he found himself whispering the same line, not for anyone to hear, just for himself. "She's reading the wind, not the data." He didn't even realize he'd said it aloud until the captain repeated it softly, as if tasting the phrase. "Reading the wind, not the data." He looked down the firing line. "That's what we've all forgotten, isn't it?" The colonel gave a quiet nod. "Maybe today we remember." Clank. 98. No one cheered. The moment was too fragile for noise. The crowd had crossed into reverence now, that rare stillness that only appears when humans witness truth expressed without ego. A teenage girl in the bleachers lowered her phone again, whispering, "I want to shoot like that someday." Her father smiled, "Then learn what she knows first." "What's that?" He looked at Tessa and answered simply, "Respect." Clank. 99. A long exhale passed through the stands, collective, quiet, as if everyone realized simultaneously how much they'd been holding their breath. The sun dropped lower, turning the world gold. The colonel spoke without looking away. "She's got two left." The captain's throat tightened. "Sir, should we?" "Don't," the colonel interrupted gently. "Let her finish her sentence." Because that's what it was now, a sentence, long and deliberate, written in the grammar of precision. Tessa breathed in. The air was cooler, touched with evening. She rolled her shoulder once, then settled back behind the rifle. Her left hand found the fore end. Her right adjusted the pad of her finger to the trigger's first stage. Everything around her blurred, the flags, the crowd, the world. Only the far plate remained clear, waiting. She could feel it, the rhythm, the unity between wind and will. The trigger broke like glass. Clank. 100. The sound rang pure bell-like, cutting through the sunset haze. The spotter's eyes filled, though he'd never admit it later. The colonel lowered his head slightly. The captain's lips parted, but no words came out. Silence stretched. Then the spotter whispered almost reverently, "One more." Tessa nodded once, as if to the universe itself. She opened the bolt, slid the final round into the chamber and closed it with the soft click of ritual. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't waver. This wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about completion. Behind her, the crowd leaned forward, 1,000 eyes and one heartbeat. Even the flags seemed to pause, waiting. The far wind flicked once, delicate. The mirage shimmered. The sun caught the edge of her scope, and for a split second the world looked suspended between light and stillness. Tessa took the breath, held it, let it fall. The rifle bucked softly. Clank. 101. The echo rang longer than any before, rolling across the flats, until it seemed to fade into the horizon itself. Then stillness. For one perfect heartbeat, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if sound itself had been stunned into silence. Then the colonel lifted his hand, slowly, deliberately, and brought it up in a crisp salute. It cut the air like sunlight through dust. The captain followed, then the sergeants, then the privates. One by one, every Marine on the line raised a hand, not as soldiers following protocol, but as men and women acknowledging truth. The civilians followed in their own way. Hats came off, heads bowed. Even the children sensed it, the weight of respect that had filled the air. The applause came late, gentle at first, then building. Not wild cheering, not the sound of victory. It was gratitude finding voice. Tessa stayed prone for a moment longer. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She simply let the echo die where it wanted. Then she lifted her head, engaged the safety, and rose slowly to her knees. Dust clung to her sleeves. Her braid slipped forward across her shoulder. She looked toward the horizon, not at the crowd, not at the Marines, just the open desert stretching into distance. Her eyes were soft, at peace. The colonel stepped forward from the rope line, cap tucked under his arm. His voice when he spoke was steady but quiet. "Ma'am," he said, the single word carrying all the weight of his rank, his years, his respect. "On behalf of every marksman who's ever missed a shot, thank you." Tessa shook her head lightly. "Just physics, sir." He smiled. "And patience, don't forget patience." She gave a faint, tired grin. "You taught the rest." For a long moment they stood there, a teacher and a student who hadn't realized until today that they'd traded places more than once. The captain approached next, rifle slung across his chest, expression open. He held out his hand. "You didn't just prove something today," he said quietly. "You reminded us what it means to listen." Tessa looked at his hand, then took it. "Wind's always talking," she said. "We just forget how to hear it." He nodded, eyes bright. The colonel turned toward his men, his voice carrying low but certain. "Gentlemen," he said, "that's what right looks like." The words rippled outward, through ranks, through bleachers, through hearts. And then there was only silence again, not empty but full. The kind of silence that comes when truth finishes speaking, and the world needs a moment to understand what it just heard. The crowd slowly began to move. People whispered. Some smiled through tears. A few simply stood, unwilling to let the moment end. Tessa brushed the dust from her pants, picked up the rifle, and cleared the chamber. She wiped the frame clean with a rag pulled from her pocket, precise even in ritual. Mr. Dale stepped forward from the tent, pride softening his face. "You didn't tell anyone, did you?" she asked with a hint of humor. He chuckled. "Wouldn't have mattered if I had. Nobody would have believed me." "Good," she said softly. "Let's keep it that way." He laughed again, the sound caught somewhere between pride and awe. "You coming to work Monday?" She glanced toward the firing line, where Marines still crowded around the targets, measuring holes that all touched dead center. "Maybe after I fix the mounts on lane 4. He grinned. "Figures." As the crowd began to disperse, a teenage girl tugged at her father's sleeve. "She works at the hardware store, right?" Her father shook his head, still watching the range. "Not anymore, kid. Not after today." Tessa didn't hear them. She was walking toward her old pickup, each step slow, deliberate, the kind of walk that belongs to someone who's just laid down a burden. Behind her, applause rose once more, softer now, like a breeze following a departing ship. She didn't turn, she didn't need to. Because she hadn't come for recognition. She'd come to give something back to the Marines, to the craft, to herself. The sun had dipped low, the sky burning orange and violet. She climbed onto the tailgate of her truck and sat there, boots dangling above the dust. The range in the distance glowed under the last light, still humming faintly from the echo of steel. She looked at her hands, rough, lined, steady. The scar along her knuckle caught the sunset like a small ribbon of silver. She smiled faintly. No one saw that smile. No camera caught it. It wasn't meant for them. It was meant for the quiet, for the wind that had waited 12 years for her to answer, for the craft that had never stopped calling her name. In the distance, a Marine shouted. She hit all 101. The crowd cheered again, but softer this time, not in triumph, but in gratitude. Tessa closed her eyes, listening. The wind brushed her braid against her shoulder, gentle as a benediction. She whispered, barely audible, "It's never about showing them. It's about remembering who you are when you take the shot." The flag above the range caught a final gust of evening air and straightened, proud and silent. And when the light finally thinned, leaving only the echo of steel and the low hum of desert wind, the story ended the way it began, quietly. Because some heroes don't need uniforms. Some don't need medals or orders or headlines. They just need a moment, one moment, to remind the world that mastery isn't loud. It's patient, it's steady, it listens. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What do you do after you've done the impossible? After the applause fades, after the sound of steel no longer echoes, after the dust begins to settle back into its old, quiet shape. For Tessa Rowan, the answer came softly, the way dusk arrives. Not sudden, not loud, just certain. She drove home with the windows down, her braid loose in the warm evening wind. The old Chevy rattled the way it always did, dashboard lights flickering like tired eyes that had seen too much. The rifle case lay across the back seat, clean, silent, weightless. Her hands still smelled faintly of oil and sand. Her fingertips carried the imprint of the trigger, not pain, not callous, just memory. The sun was low, a red coin sinking behind the hills. The road curved through empty fields, long stretches of quiet framed by barbed wire and faded signs. She didn't turn on the radio. She didn't need music tonight. The rhythm of the engine and the whisper of wind through the cracked window were enough. Halfway home, she caught her reflection in the side mirror, soft lines, sun-browned skin, tired eyes that still carried fire. For a moment, she almost didn't recognize herself. She whispered, "Still me." The wind answered by lifting a strand of hair from her cheek and setting it gently back down. "Yeah, still you." When she reached town, the sky had dimmed into violet. The small diner by the gas station still had its neon sign half flickering. The hardware store was closed, lights off, the flag outside wrapped around its pole in the night breeze. She parked beside the curb and sat for a while, hands on the steering wheel, eyes distant. A few people were still out, faces she knew. The man who ran the feed store, the woman from the post office. They gave small waves when they recognized the truck. Tessa nodded back, a quiet smile that said she didn't need to talk about it. Because she knew by morning they'd all know. Not because she'd tell them, she never would, but because stories that carry truth travel faster than voices. She climbed out, locked the truck, and crossed the street toward her small apartment above the laundromat. The stairs creaked under her boots. The hall smelled faintly of detergent and rain that hadn't come yet. Inside, the room was simple, neat, small, everything in its place. A single framed photo sat on the table beside her chair. Two figures in camouflage, younger, smiling, one with the same eyes she saw in the mirror now. She touched the edge of the frame with her thumb. "Hey, Sam," she said softly. The man in the photo didn't answer. He never would. Her brother had been the one who first taught her to shoot, long before she knew what windage or moa meant. He taught her how to breathe through it, how to wait, how to see what others didn't. He'd been gone 10 years now. Some wounds never heal. They just learn to sit quietly beside you. Tessa sat down in the chair, the old wood creaking under her. She leaned back, eyes half closed. The sound of the range drifted back through her, faint echoes, steel ringing like distant bells, the crowd's silence, the colonel's salute, the captain's voice. She exhaled slowly, It wasn't about them, was it? The question hung in the air, the kind of question that didn't need an answer. Because deep down she already knew. It had been about her, and about Sam, and about every soldier who'd ever walked away from a field believing they'd left something behind they could never get back. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, Rowan. A man's voice came through, steady, respectful. Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Colonel Gable. She blinked, surprised. Sir. He chuckled softly. Didn't mean to interrupt your evening. I just wanted to say thank you again for today. Tessa leaned back in her chair, letting the silence stretch before she answered. You already did, sir. Maybe, but not properly. We've had shooters come through that range for years. No one ever done what you did. I thought you'd like to know the recording already being passed around the bases. They're calling it the Rowan Run. She sighed, smiling faintly. Don't turn it into a legend, sir. Legends forget what's real, and this was real. The colonel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Understood. Another pause. Then, you taught something out there today. Every young Marine who was watching, they saw what patience looks like when it refuses to die. You can't teach that with lectures. Tessa stared at the floor, the faint hum of the fridge filling the silence. Sir, I didn't do it for them. I know. More silence. Then why'd you do it? He asked quietly. She thought about that for a while. The answer didn't come quickly. It came the way truth always does, slowly, honestly. Because I needed to know I still could. The colonel exhaled through the line. You can, and you did. They said nothing else for a while. Just the sound of distant static, like wind across dry fields. Finally he said, Good night, Ms. Rowan. She smiled. Good night, Colonel. The line clicked. She set the phone down, leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The silence in the room was different now, not empty, peaceful. She thought of Sam again, of his laugh, of the way he used to say, The wind doesn't lie, Tess. People do. Trust the wind. She whispered, I did, Sam. I finally did. Outside, a truck rumbled past. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. The night folded itself around her like an old blanket. Hours later, she woke with the same calm heartbeat she'd carried all day. The next morning came clear and bright. The desert sky was clean, blue, infinite. She stood at her window, coffee in hand, watching dust drift lazily through the empty lot. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message. From Captain Reese. Text, Ma'am, just wanted to say range is quiet this morning. Feels different, like it's waiting. Tessa smiled, typing back. Then listen, it's probably trying to tell you something. She set the phone aside, finished her coffee and pulled on her jacket. There was work to do, bolts to count, tools to restock. Life never paused just because the world finally noticed you. When she stepped outside, Mrs. Lang from the bakery was sweeping her storefront. Heard you did something yesterday, dear, the woman said with a knowing smile. Tessa shrugged lightly, just target practice. Mrs. Lang chuckled. That's what they all say right before they end up in the papers. Hope not, Tessa said. I like being quiet. Quiet doesn't stay hidden long, Mrs. Lang replied. Not when it's that loud. Tessa didn't answer. She just smiled, tipped her cap, and kept walking. By noon, the town had started buzzing. The clip had reached social media, not through any official source, but from a shaky phone video someone had recorded from the bleachers. The caption read, Civilian volunteer outshoots Marine snipers, 101 straight hits. Who is she? Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Comments filled the thread. Respect. That's how you do it. She's a legend. Reminds me why I joined. Tessa ignored them all. She stayed in the workshop, sorting washers, tightening bolts, tuning old tools that didn't need tuning. but every so often she'd pause, not to read, not to smile, but to listen. Because even through the hum of machines and chatter of the street, she could still hear it, the echo, the clean, clear ring of steel. It wasn't gone, it was inside her now. That night she drove back out to the range, alone this time. No crowd, no flags, no cameras, just her truck, the stars, and the low hum of wind moving through sagebrush. She set up a single plate at 800 meters. No lights, no spotter, no sound but the wind. She loaded one round. Breathed. Waited. Fired. Clank. The sound rolled through the empty desert like a heartbeat. She smiled, quiet, private. Then she packed up, walked to the truck, and sat on the tailgate under the stars. No applause, no cameras, just her and the night and the memory of her brother's voice. The wind doesn't lie. She whispered, "Yeah, I know." Above her, the stars shimmered like distant steel. The wind brushed her hair forward and carried her whisper away into the dark. And for the first time in years, Tessa Rowan felt lighter than silence itself. Because sometimes, the world doesn't need to hear you roar. Sometimes it just needs to know you're still listening. What happens to a moment after it leaves you? Sometimes it fades, sometimes it echoes, and sometimes, if it's true enough, it begins to build a life of its own. 3 days after the range, the town felt different, like air after rain. Nothing visible had changed, but people carried themselves with quieter curiosity, a little more care in how they spoke each other's names. The story had spread far beyond the county. News outlets wanted interviews, training divisions requested details, veterans' pages called her the silent legend. Tessa ignored them all. She still opened the hardware store every morning at 8 sharp, still sorted bolts by size, still kept the backroom tidy, still nodded politely when customers mentioned that viral video. But what she didn't expect, what caught her by surprise, was how the story began to return to her in small, human ways. A teenage boy came in one afternoon, eyes bright, voice awkward. "Ma'am, are you the lady from the shooting range?" Tessa didn't look up right away. "Depends," she said softly. "Which range?" "The one where you hit us, all of them." She smiled, half amused. "That one." He shuffled his feet. "I just wanted to say my brother's a Marine." He said everyone at his base watched it, said it made them want to practice again, said it made them remember why they started. Tessa leaned against the counter, studying the boy's nervous hands. "Tell him thank you, but tell him it wasn't about showing off." He nodded quickly. "He said that too. He said you taught them that control isn't about power, it's about peace." She blinked once, quietly impressed. "Your brother sounds smart." The boy smiled, shrugged, and left, leaving behind that sentence like a gift. Control isn't about power, it's about peace. That night, Tessa sat at her table, turning those words over in her mind. She remembered the colonel's salute, the captain's quiet awe, the way the wind had carried her brother's voice back to her through every shot. Peace, that was what it had been. A reckoning, not a victory. The phone rang again. She almost didn't answer, expecting another reporter. But when she did, the voice on the line was different. "Ms. Rowan." "Yes." "This is Major Callan, Training Division, Quantico. I wanted to ask if you'd consider coming up for a short advisory session. Just 2 days. Wind dynamics and applied marksmanship psychology. We'd cover expenses." Tessa stared at the wall, the hum of the refrigerator filling the long pause. "I'm not a soldier anymore," she said finally. "That's exactly why we want you," Callan replied. "Because you remember what they've forgotten. We can teach shooting all day, but patience, awareness, humility, that's something else." Tessa closed her eyes, remembering the desert, the sound of steel, the faces of those young Marines, their pride folding into respect. She said quietly, "Send me the details." Quantico smelled like oil, salt, and ghosts. She hadn't been back to a base in 12 years. The architecture was the same, the gray buildings, the rigid lines, the clipped voices. But she walked through it now without the weight of belonging or bitterness. Just understanding. Major Callan met her at the range gate. "Glad you came, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," she said, smiling. "I'm not your superior." He grinned. "After what I saw, that's debatable." They shook hands. His grip was firm but respectful. "We've got a group of advanced shooters waiting inside. They've seen the footage. Hope that's okay." Tessa sighed. "Not really, but it'll have to be." When they stepped onto the range, the group straightened immediately. Men and women in digital camo, boots planted, rifles slung, eyes forward. The captain from before, Reese, was among them. "Good to see you again," he said, his tone warmer now, less formal. "Didn't think I'd be back here," Tessa admitted. He smiled faintly. "None of us thought you'd say yes." She shrugged. "Neither did I." Callan gestured toward the firing lanes. "They've read your notes. They want to see it for themselves." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "You want a demonstration?" "No," he said. "We want a lesson." She studied their faces, young, eager, some proud, some nervous. The kind of expressions she used to have herself before she learned how easily pride fogs clarity. "All right," she said softly. "First rule, stop trying to win against the wind. It's older than you. It'll always win. The trick isn't fighting it, it's dancing with it." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the line. She continued, walking behind them, voice low but steady. "You've been taught that accuracy is math. That's true up to a point. But there's something math can't measure: intuition. You only get that through silence, through waiting, through paying attention when nothing seems to be happening." She stopped beside one shooter, adjusted the angle of his shoulder. "You're too tight here. Tension makes you deaf to feedback. Loosen up." He obeyed and she nodded. "Better feel that?" "Yes, ma'am." She smiled faintly. "Don't call me ma'am." Reese chuckled behind her. "She told me that too." By the end of the first hour, the range had changed. The usual chatter between shots was gone. Each Marine had fallen into quiet rhythm: watch, breathe, adjust, release. The steel began to ring, not constant, not perfect, but better. Tessa walked the line, offering small corrections. A nod here, a tap on a shoulder, a single phrase: "Let it breathe." By midday, Callan leaned toward her. "You've got them in a trance." She shook her head. "Not trance, awareness." He frowned slightly. "That's the same thing, isn't it?" She looked downrange, eyes half narrowed against the shimmer. "No, a trance shuts the world out. Awareness lets it in." He followed her gaze, understanding dawning. Reese set his rifle down after a clean hit at 900. "Ma'am, sorry, Ms. Rowan, how do you know when it's right? Before the shot, I mean." Tessa considered that. "When I can hear my own heartbeat, but it doesn't bother me anymore." He smiled, as if the line had been worth the whole day. By late afternoon, clouds began to roll in. Wind shifted hard and quick, unpredictable, choppy. A few shooters groaned in frustration. Tessa smiled. "Good, now it's real." She lay down beside one of them, borrowed a rifle, and glanced toward the horizon. "Watch the flags. Forget the flags. Watch the heat lines. The shimmer will tell you more truth than the cloth." She loaded, breathed once, and fired. Clank! The steel sang. She turned to the young Marine beside her. "Now you." He swallowed, adjusted, and shot. The plate rang. He looked stunned. "What did you change?" he asked. She smiled. "I listened longer than you did." By sunset, the clouds broke apart, the light turning gold again, just like that day in the desert. Callan stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head slowly. "You've got to come back more often." Tessa picked up a spent casing, rolling it between her fingers. "I think this was enough." "Enough for who?" "For them," she said, "and for me." Reese approached, hand out again. You know, ma'am, you've probably taught more today by saying less than most instructors do in a month. She looked at him, eyes soft. Maybe that's the point. That night she stayed in a small base guest room overlooking the range. The moon hung low and pale. From her window, she could still see the lanes glinting silver in the dark. She sat by the window with a mug of coffee, the steam curling against the glass. The phone buzzed again, a message from Callan. "CALLEN, you made believers out of skeptics, thank you." She smiled, typed back one line. "Tessa, wind did most of the work." She set the phone aside and stared out at the distant targets. They looked peaceful now, still waiting. She thought of Sam again, of that first time he'd shown her how to read mirage through a cheap scope. "You see those waves," he'd said, pointing. "That's the desert talking. Learn its language and you'll never miss what matters." She whispered to the night, "I learned, Sam." The wind outside shifted, brushing against the glass like an answer. She closed her eyes and listened. Because in the end, she didn't need applause or medals or headlines. What she needed, what she had found again, was connection. The same unspoken bond between wind, steel, and silence that had always guided her. The same stillness that had once made her extraordinary. Now it simply made her whole. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in a plain brown envelope. No stamp of rank, no seal, just handwriting, careful, young, uncertain. She opened it. "Ms. Rowan, I'm one of the Marines you taught at Quantico. You said to let the wind teach us patience. Yesterday it saved my life. I waited instead of rushing a shot. The wind shifted and the world changed. I hit what mattered. Thank you." Tessa folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat on the table. Her eyes glistened. She didn't cry. She just let the quiet do what it always did, remind her. That teaching doesn't end when you leave the classroom. That influence doesn't fade when you stop speaking. That sometimes the smallest ripples carry the longest echoes. Outside, the flag by the hardware store flapped once, then fell still. She smiled, whispering, "That's enough." And somewhere far away, on a base, on a field, on a range, another young soldier breathed through the wind, steadied his heartbeat, and remembered a quiet woman's voice saying, "Let it breathe." He did, and the world answered with clarity. What do you do when the world finally goes quiet enough for you to hear your own ghosts? For Tessa Rowan, the silence after Quantico was louder than applause had ever been. She returned home to her small desert town, to the sound of crickets under neon, to the hum of ceiling fans, to the stillness that had once felt like exile but now felt like peace. Her boots carried new dust this time, not from the range, but from memory itself. The wind seemed to know her again. It followed her down the road, brushed her shoulder like an old friend. She parked the truck behind the hardware store, climbed the back stairs, and paused at her door. The air smelled of sage and rain that hadn't yet fallen. Inside, the apartment looked the same, but she was. On the table lay the folded letter from the Marine, the one who'd written that her lesson had saved his life. Next to it sat a smaller envelope, yellowed from years in the drawer. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. Her brother's handwriting. Sam Rowan. She'd never opened it. He'd written it before his final deployment, just in case. She'd found it among his things afterward, sealed, simple, terrifying. For a decade, she hadn't been ready. But now, after the range, after the silence, after the rediscovery of everything she thought she'd lost, she was. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The paper unfolded with a sound like breath. She began to read. "Tess, if you're reading this, I didn't come back. Don't look away when you hear that. I'm not sorry. We both knew what this life could ask of us. You always had the steadier hand, the quieter soul. You never missed, not really, even when you thought you did. Remember what I told you the night before I left, about the wind. The wind doesn't lie, Tess, but people do, especially to themselves. Don't become one of them. When you're scared, listen. When you're tired, breathe. When you're angry, aim smaller. And when you forget who you are, go find the silence again. It'll tell you. You're not built for crowds or glory. You're built for truth. Keep listening for it. Sam. She read it 3 times. By the 4th, she was crying, not with sound, but with stillness. The kind of tears that roll quietly and vanish before you can feel them fall. She whispered, "I found it, Sam." The room didn't answer. It didn't need to. She folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and tucked it into the box where she kept her old patches and range tags. Then she stood, pulled on her jacket, and stepped outside. The sky was heavy with clouds now, bruised purple at the edges. Wind swept the street in soft, unpredictable waves. She followed it without knowing why, past the diner, past the feed store, out toward the old field road that led to nowhere but memory. At the edge of town stood a weathered wooden cross, small and unmarked, leaning slightly. She built it herself years ago, right after the funeral. The desert around it was bare, except for a few stubborn patches of wild grass. She knelt there, brushing dust from the crossbeam. "Hey," she said softly, "you still listening?" The wind stirred the grass. She smiled faintly. "I did what you said. I found the silence again." A gust lifted her braid, tugged it across her shoulder like an affectionate touch. She laughed quietly through tears. "Don't start with that poetic crap now." The gust died down, leaving only stillness. She sat in the dirt, back against the post, looking out toward the horizon. The clouds were moving fast, low, like restless thoughts. She thought about all the years she'd spent trying to fill silence with work, the bolts, the shelves, the meaningless routines. All the years she'd avoided the range because she thought touching a rifle again meant going backward. But she'd been wrong. It hadn't been about the weapon. It had been about remembering what listening felt like. And Sam had known that all along. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once missed a shot she never forgave herself for. The same hands that had trembled over a letter she couldn't open. Now steady. The wind pressed against her again, steady too. She whispered, "You'd have laughed, you know, watching them all lose their breath over a piece of steel." Another soft gust. She smiled. "Yeah, I know you'd say the plate never mattered, Tess. The pause did." Her laughter turned quiet again. "You were always right." Lightning flashed in the distance, far away, faint. A promise of rain that might or might not come. She stayed until the light faded entirely, until the desert turned blue and then black, until she couldn't tell sky from ground or past from present. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, not because she'd left grief behind, but because she'd finally made space for it to breathe beside her. As she walked back toward town, the first raindrops began to fall. They hit the dust softly, darkening the earth one grain at a time. By the time she reached the diner, her shoulders were wet. She didn't hurry. Rain in the desert was rare, you didn't rush it. Inside, a few regulars looked up as she entered, dripping slightly, hat tilted low. "Even in, Tess," said the waitress, wiping down a counter. "Coffee." "Please." She took her usual booth by the window. Steam fogged the glass. The smell of frying onions and rain mixed into something strangely comforting. When the mug arrived, she wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. A young woman 2 booths away was scrolling through her phone, the faint sound of a video playing. Tessa recognized the echo immediately, the faint ring of steel. The woman looked up, catching Tessa's eye, startled. "Wait, that's you, isn't it?" Tessa smiled softly. "Maybe." "My boyfriend in the Corps," the girl said. "He made me watch this, said it's the best example of control he's ever seen." Tessa nodded. "He's right about the control part, but not the rest." "What do you mean?" She stirred her coffee, eyes still on the window. People see control and think it's strength, but it's really understanding. You don't force the wind, you just wait until it trusts you. The girl blinked, absorbing that. That's beautiful. Tessa shrugged, it's practice. They smiled at each other, and then the girl went back to her phone, softer now, quieter, as if she too had learned something unspoken. Tessa finished her coffee, paid her bill, and stepped back out into the rain. The air smelled clean now, renewed. She walked slowly through the puddled street, boots splashing, headlights sliding past. Every sound felt alive. Every breath felt earned. And though no one else could hear it, she could, faint, steady, eternal. The rhythm of 101 perfect echoes. Not in her ears, in her chest. Later that night, she sat by the window again, watching lightning blink along the horizon. She opened a small notebook, the one she'd kept since she was 22. Most of its pages were blank, but a few were filled with fragments. Numbers, notes on mirage, quotes from Sam, sketches of wind patterns. She turned to a clean page and began to write. Lesson 1, patience is not waiting, it's listening while you wait. Lesson 2, the wind doesn't lie, but it doesn't speak twice either. Pay attention the first time. Lesson 3, you are not your misses. You are what you choose to aim for after them. Her handwriting was careful, small, each line written like a confession to herself. She paused, tapped the pen against the paper, then wrote one more. Lesson 4, silence is not emptiness. It's the space where truth breathes. She closed the notebook, placed it beside Sam's letter, and turned off the light. The rain continued through the night, slow and cleansing. And somewhere in that rhythm, between the drops and the quiet, she found what she hadn't dared name until now. Peace. Not the absence of pain. Not the forgetting of loss. But the understanding that both could exist together, like wind and steel, sound and silence. The next morning, the town woke to clear skies and the smell of wet dust. Tessa walked down to the range alone. The air was cool, the ground soft. She didn't bring a rifle this time. She just stood there, looking downrange, listening. The plates still hung where she'd left them, silent, waiting. She whispered, "You can rest now." A breeze moved through the flags, gentle, approving. She turned away, walking back toward the horizon. Behind her, the range stayed still, but the wind, as if out of gratitude, carried one soft note of echo, a faint metallic hum that could have been memory or miracle. Tessa didn't look back, because she didn't need proof anymore. She'd already found her answer. How does a legend end when it never asked to begin? Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just fades into other people, one breath, one memory, one choice at a time. A month had passed since the day of 101 shots. The headlines had slowed, the interviews stopped calling. But the echo hadn't died. It lived in classrooms and ranges, in quiet voices and handwritten notes pinned to barracks walls. It lived in every young Marine who'd been there that day, who had seen patience look stronger than force. And it lived quietly in Tessa Rowan herself. She'd gone back to her small rhythms, coffee at dawn, workbench at 8, dinner when the sun dropped low. The world had changed around her, but she refused to change her pace. One morning, as she was sorting brass fittings behind the counter, the doorbell chimed. A young woman stood there, nervous posture, new fatigues, eyes that carried both pride and uncertainty. "Ms. Rowan." Tessa looked up. "That's me." The woman smiled shyly. "I'm Cadet Hendricks. I just transferred from Bennying. Major Callan said I should look you up, said you might help me understand wind better." Tessa arched an eyebrow. "Wind, huh? That's a big thing to understand." "I know, ma'am, but he said if anyone could teach it, it'd be you." Tessa studied her for a moment, the eagerness, the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She recognized all of it. She'd been that once. She grabbed her keys from the hook. "Grab your hat. We're going for a drive." The field was quiet when they arrived, the same old range, same stretch of horizon. The flags moved lazily in the morning air. Tessa set down 2 mats. You shoot. Yes, ma'am, qualified last month. Good, stop calling me ma'am. The cadet grinned. Yes, ma'am. Tessa sighed, shaking her head. You're impossible. They both laughed, and something eased between them, the kind of small laughter that makes learning possible. For the next hour, they worked in silence. Tessa adjusted her stance, corrected her grip, taught her how to read shimmer lines on the sand instead of chasing flag movement. When Hendricks missed the first few, frustration rose in her throat. I don't get it, she muttered. I'm doing everything right. Tessa crouched beside her. You're doing everything right physically, but that's not the whole thing. Then what is? Stop listening to the rifle. Start listening to yourself. The young woman blinked. How do I do that? By being quiet long enough to notice what you sound like. Hendricks frowned. You mean my breathing? Tessa smiled faintly. Not just that. Your fear, your doubt, your need to prove something. All that noise gets in the way. You don't fight it. You wait until it stops shouting. The cadet nodded slowly, laying back down. This time she didn't rush, didn't grip too tight. She waited. Breathed. Fired. Clank. The sound rang across the flats. Hendricks's eyes went wide. I hit it. Tessa grinned. Told you, you were just talking too loud in your own head. The girl laughed, relief spilling through her voice. That's amazing. No, Tessa said softly, that's awareness. The wind moved again, gentle, approving. For the rest of the afternoon, they took turns, talking little, laughing often. Each shot a rhythm, each breath a small conversation between mentor and student. By sunset, the cadet packed her rifle and said quietly, Major Callan was right. You don't just teach wind, you teach calm. Tessa chuckled, same thing really. As they drove back into town, the horizon burned gold again. The same color it had been that day she'd borrowed a rifle and reminded a field of Marines what grace looked like. Only now it wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about continuation. That evening she sat on the tailgate again, watching the sky fade. The range lay in the distance, barely visible through dusk. Beside her sat Hendricks, legs dangling, sipping water from a canteen. Ma'am, sorry, Ms. Rowan, the cadet said. Can I ask something? Go ahead. When you hit all those targets, were you proud? Tessa thought about that. At first, no, I was just relieved. Relieved? Yeah, because I finally stopped trying to prove anything. The hits weren't the point, the peace was. The girl nodded slowly. My mom says peace is when the world finally leaves you alone. Tessa smiled. Maybe, but I think real peace is when you can sit in the middle of the world and it can't take your silence away. They sat in quiet after that, watching the last light fade. Somewhere out there, coyotes called. The desert answered. Hendricks turned to her mentor. Do you ever miss it? The service, I mean. Tessa considered the question. No, I miss the people. I miss teaching them how to listen. But service was never the uniform. It was what you give to whoever's standing next to you. The cadet nodded, absorbing that. I think I understand. You will, Tessa said. Just keep listening. Weeks passed. More cadets came, a few at first, then dozens. Word spread quietly, like everything in Tessa's life seemed to. She didn't open a school, didn't advertise. She just showed up at dawn and waited. Some days 2 or 3 would come, some days none, but the routine stayed. Coffee, range, silence, wind. And in that silence, she built something lasting, not a legend but a lineage. Each student left with more than accuracy. They left with stillness stitched into their breathing. And the story of the woman who once hit 101 targets straight stopped being about perfection. It became a story about patience, about humility, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. One evening, as she locked the store, she noticed a letter taped to the door. It was from the Marine who'd written before, the one whose life her lesson had saved. "Ms. Rowan, I heard you're teaching again. I hope that's true, because we still need people who believe silence has value. I've been deployed again, but every time I line up a shot, I hear your voice. Let it breathe. It's funny, the longer I listen, the less afraid I am. Thank you." She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her notebook next to Sam's and the others. Then she stepped outside, looked up at the night sky and whispered, "He's listening too." The wind stirred softly, like laughter carried from another lifetime. Months later, on a bright winter morning, she stood at the range with her students. The air was cool, clean, alive. "All right," she called. "Today's the hard one, no targets." The cadets looked confused. "No targets." "Not physical ones," she said, smiling. "Today we shoot into silence." They stared. She explained, "You're going to set your sights, breathe, and fire into the open air. No feedback, no applause, no proof. Just trust that you aimed right." One cadet raised a hand. "But how will we know if we hit?" "You won't," Tessa said softly. "That's the point." They hesitated, then one by one followed. The cracks of rifles echoed into the open sky. No clang, no steel, just wind-swallowing sound. When it was over, Tessa nodded. "That's what discipline feels like, doing the right thing even when no one's watching." Hendrik smiled. "That's kind of poetic." "Don't tell anyone," Tessa said with a grin. "I've got a reputation to maintain." The laughter drifted away, soft and real. That night, after everyone left, she lingered a while longer. The range was empty again. The wind had gone gentle. The sky was bruised with sunset. She walked down the line, fingers brushing the worn wood of the benches, the faint grooves from generations of shooters before her. Every mark, every scar, every stain a story. She whispered, "Thank you." Then she sat down, facing the horizon. Her hands rested on her knees. Her breathing was steady. For the first time in years, she didn't think about the past or the future. She didn't replay the shots or the cheers or the grief. She just listened. To the air moving through dry grass. To the far hum of a flag against its pole. To the quiet heartbeat of a land that had carried her through every lesson she'd ever needed. And then, without planning to, she smiled wide, unguarded, free. The next morning, a cadet arrived early, found her still sitting there. "Ms. Rowan." She looked up, eyes bright in the dawn light. "Morning. You've been here all night." "Yeah, didn't feel like leaving." The cadet smiled. "Wind was good." Tessa nodded. "Perfect." He hesitated. "Can I ask one thing? After everything, after the record, after teaching us, what's the biggest thing you've learned?" She looked out toward the horizon, where the light was just beginning to touch the far dunes. Her answer came quietly, but it carried the weight of every breath, every shot, every silence she'd ever known. "That dignity doesn't speak," she said. "It simply acts." She paused, "And when you finally stop needing to prove who you are, that's when you become it." The cadet nodded slowly, like someone being handed something too precious to respond to. He whispered, "Thank you." She smiled. "Don't thank me, just listen." The wind lifted again, soft, endless, infinite. And as the sun rose over the range, it caught her face in gold. No fanfare, no sound. Just light. And the faint, eternal echo of a single truth carried across every mile of silence she'd ever learned to love. Sometimes mastery isn't about hitting targets. It's about becoming the calm between them. And sometimes the strongest sound in the world is the one that doesn't need to be made at all.